So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to lecture 2, Introduction to Optimization Problems. We have seen a couple of interesting optimization problems already. Hello. Yeah, maybe you can mute yourself unless you want to speak something or ask a question. So we certainly welcome to ask questions, but don't speak otherwise. Otherwise, I mean, don't mute, unmute otherwise. It becomes distracting. Okay. So we're going to conclude the third application or illustration through principal component analysis. Without going into any further detail of principal component analysis, what we'll do is um, present how it can be solved, and thereafter we look at low rank and non-negative matrix factorization, contextual bandits, etc. So low rank and non-negative matrix factorization will turn out to be natural, interesting follow-ups. Okay, there's a problem in writing now. I have to can't it write. Hmm. I'll have to let me just hopefully now I should be able to write. So the screen is visible, right? Okay, just continuing. I was explaining how the solution to principal what follows, which is a low rank and non-negative matrix factorization. We'll then look at contextual bandits and learning from log data, and then move on to discrete optimization problems. Okay, this is the plan for today. Let's see how much we can do. So recap that we talked about the principal component analysis problem, where given unsupervised data, you have this x1, x2, xn forming the columns of a matrix X. Okay, x1, each of them is a column matrix, column vector, x2 and xn. You're trying to compress it using U, um, and you're trying to decompress it. Okay, so just to be consistent, we'll just call these M. Okay, xm and yeah. So you're trying to apply um, the U transpose to compress the xi's, so that we are able to get them into a smaller dimensional space. So the PCA optimization problem we had shown to be the same as trying to minimize norm of xi minus UU transpose xi norm square How do you solve this? Well, it turns out that the solution to this is fairly simple and it's based on the singular value decomposition. Um, all of you have seen the eigenvalue decomposition, right? So recap. So if you have a matrix A, right, then you know that the x lambda form an eigenvector eigenvalue pair if ax equals lambda x, right? And that leads to the overall decomposition ax equals no, capital lambda x or x lambda, depending on how you state it. Okay. Okay, this lambda is a diagonal matrix of eigenvalues. Now imagine that this is when you have A being a square matrix, right? For A, which is basically in say RP by P. But imagine that A is not square, it's rectangular. You could still have something called the singular value decomposition. And the singular value decomposition is basically stated as follows. So if you have a matrix X, you could have, I just don't want to overload X here. Let me use another, let's say you have a matrix B. Then you could have its singular value decomposition as say V sigma U transpose. You can use U sigma V transpose as well. Um, this sigma is of course not a square matrix if B is not a square matrix. So let's say B is an um, M cross N matrix. Then what would be the dimension of V? Anyone? It certainly has to be M cross something. It will be M cross M. Sigma will be what? An M cross N matrix. And U will be an N cross N matrix. U transpose, sorry. Yeah, U. For that matter, U. Okay. So this sigma would have number of basically singular values, which would correspond to the rank of B. So sigma would look sigma 1, sigma, okay, so K, and the rest will be 0. So K is would correspond to the rank of B. It could also turn out to be the min of M and N, but in general, it's always going to be less than the min of M and N. Okay. So given this, what's the relation between singular value decomposition and eigenvalue decomposition? Well, you could do the following. At least for B, you could consider the eigenvalue decomposition for B transpose B and the eigenvalue decomposition for BB transpose. But let's consider for a while the eigenvalue decomposition of P transpose B. Okay, so I'm going to just start a new page and let's copy some of the stuff there. Okay, So let's look at now the eigenvalue decomposition corresponding to B transpose B. So let's say B transpose B. What is the expression for B transpose B? You'll basically get U sigma transpose, which is sigma. It's a symmetric diagonal matrix. Sigma is diagonal. So you'll basically get U sigma transpose sigma. You'll have basically sigma square if you want. And then, sorry, there will be, yeah, so U transpose, so B transpose B will also entail a product of the B transpose, which you get, which is U, with some elements in the others, right? So there will be U sigma. There will also be a V transpose, and then there'll be a V, and then there'll be a, yeah, just to be consistent, there'll be sigma V, and then there'll be U transpose. This UU transpose is such that, okay, and VV transpose are such that they yield identity matrices. So as a result, this B transpose B is nothing but U sigma square, or sigma transpose sigma, if you want to keep it that way, times V transpose. Oh, sorry, U transpose. Okay, so likewise, you can show that BB transpose has the form resulting from the original expression here of V sigma transpose sigma of V transpose. So both of these have very natural eigenvalue decompositions. The eigenvalues of B transpose B are the square of the singular values of B. Okay. In fact, that's true about B transpose as well. Okay. So the summary is the eigenvalues of B transpose B and of BB transpose are squares of the singular values of basically the matrix B, original matrix B. Think of this B transpose B as a covariance matrix. Okay, that's exactly what principal component analysis tries to maximize and find directions of maximum variance. Okay, so going back, how would you solve this? So let me, I mean, we have got the abstraction on the next page. So I'm going to clear this space. I would like your suggestions on how you would solve. With this background, how would you solve PCA? What would be the first principal component? Do you think there would be a role played by the singular value decomposition of the matrix X? So suppose I had the singular value decomposition of the matrix X. What could you do with it? Yes, I would like you to interact and contribute.
So I'll try to express my data point X with the help of principal components of X transpose X.
Of X transpose X. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So X transpose X is exactly the direction of maximum variance, and I had given that equivalence. Yes. So you'll try and do the use again decomposition, and what would be those principal components? That's my question.
With maximum singular values, top K or top something like that. Like I mean the principal components which has maximum singular values.
Right. Yes, obviously the name singularity is coming from maximum singular value. So the PCS of X would correspond to what? Could correspond to or the ith PCA, right? Correspond to the components. Can I say components of U? Okay, so I have deliberately uses U here. So this U sorted by, so we are talking about the kth principal component sorted by what?
Decreasing order of the squared of the singular
Yes.
values.
Right. Singular value squares which are there in sigma or other sigma square. Okay. So roughly that's how you solve, right? So EI is the eigenvector corresponding to the ith largest eigenvector of X transpose X. That's I showed you this, right? So if you go by this decomposition, then UI, the ith largest eigenvector of U would correspond to the same as the ith singular value, ith principal component, right? And yeah, the rest is something we have discussed already. The eigenvalues A is sigma transpose sigma are obtained as the squares of the singular values in sigma. Okay, so this is a very important decomposition. This actually leads us to the next topic as well. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. We haven't tried to prove much, just use linear algebra to present some insight into the behavior of singular values for X vis-a-vis the eigenvalues for X transpose X, which captures the covariance. So that's important to, I'll just highlight that point. So when singular value squares is because you recap that X transpose X captures covariance, right? And PCA is concerned with maximizing variance. The variance direction of variance. Okay, thanks. So let's move on to the next topic with this background. Okay, so the next topic is matrix completion, as I already mentioned upfront. Now the idea here is that you could have a matrix X such as a product recommendation matrix. So let's say we have different people having purchased different products. You could have users. Okay, so my rows are going to denote users, and the columns are going to denote say products. And as I mentioned in the last class, it's some information is known. Certain users have purchased certain products, whereas some of the information is not known. Okay, and that needs to be completed. The completion is towards some goal. The YI, for example, is an end goal. It could be, for example, clicking on a certain product. It may not be even concerned with buying them. So YIs are observations based on the underlying product recommendation matrix X. It could also be just identity. AJ could just be identity as well. That's also possible. Okay. So our concern is largely about completing this matrix X, which could have several derivatives. So now how do you fill up this is a question. And well, as I already hinted, there's some role that will be played by the kind of decompositions we discussed in the previous slide. Okay, so goal Yeah, you're trying to fill up the missing question mark entries by doing what? So while you're trying to look at user behavior and product behavior. Or you can think of these as features, user features and product features. Um, you when you say looking at, you're trying to characterize. So it's not necessarily looking at um, without an objective. So we are trying to characterize their behavior, but we want to characterize a behavior in such a way that the matrix X is as simple as possible. So let me try and give a way of articulating simplicity. Okay, so let's say um, you are trying to characterize this using user behavior. Let's call this U matrix. Oh, and product behavior, say characterize using matrix P. Okay, so U transpose P. And let me give you a degenerate example. A degenerate example is, let's say when U transpose rather is a single column. Just saying, well, these are the list of users. I mean, there's nothing much we are talking about it. And a degenerate case of the products is when it's a single row. Okay, so let's say this is a so you could be, for example, in R K cross M, and to have compatible dimensions, let's say P is an R K cross N, right? This matrix itself is X itself is in, okay, R M cross N. I've already written that. Okay, now let's look at an example of K equals 1. So when K equals 1, you're basically going to have U as this U transpose, sorry, as a column vector. P is a single row vector of dimension n. Okay, no, sorry, I should put it this way. Okay, um, so what would be the behavior of U transpose P? Anyone wants to answer that? What would U transpose B correspond to? Yes.
So should it correspond to X?
Well, if this is an approximation, right? So you're trying to approximate X. So it would be a rank 1 matrix when U transpose P is computed when U itself is just in dimension. I mean, basically one dimension. P is also in one dimension. I mean, its rank is 1. It's an m dimensional vector, but it has rank 1, right? The number of columns in U transpose is 1. So what would happen is U transpose P would look like this element into this element, this element into this element. So basically, they'll appear to be all scaled versions of P. Okay, so imagine that U1, U2 are the right entries. You'll have just this to be U1 times P, U2 as a scalar times P, and U M times P. So the rank one matrix. Is this clear? Of course, we are looking at something more interesting than this. So what we want is X to be somewhat characterized by simple user behavior and simple product behavior. We want there to be simplicity in the X. That's what we are trying to capture. But this is overly simple. So can you think of a better simplification? So we would like X to be simple, and my hint to you is the simplicity can come through K. So K being one is one extreme example, but what would be another a more practical example of simplicity?
Sir, maybe n. So m, sir, m. K equal to m.
Well, K equals M. So smaller of M and N, right? Yeah. Um, so simple X could be could correspond to lower values of K. I mean, not necessarily one, right?
Yes, sir.
So it it could just correspond to the lower of the two values M and N, but it could be even lower than that. Okay, so let's take this discussion forward. So the idea is to find the simplest matrix X such that A, J, X is Yj. Okay. So since our focus is completely on X, and as I said, the AJ could just become an identity transformation. We'll continue this. How do you exactly characterize simplicity? Mm, One way is, let's look at something like singular value decomposition. Recap SVD. Okay. Let me V sigma U transpose. And I said that the sigma would have non-zero sigmas, as many non-zero sigmas as the rank of B, which should be less than equal to the min of M and N, right? So if you recap from this, consider, let's say, so consider the SVD of X, which is V sigma U transpose with let's say, we know that there are K, let's say K non-zero entries. Actually, let me make it R, not K, because I might be interested in K less than R. So R is the rank. Now, if I'm interested in simplest matrix, I would be interested in K value which equals R, or I might even try and simplify it, because I'm not necessarily trying to recover the original matrix which gives me all the Yj's. So I want the simplest matrix X. Okay. Now the rank of the matrix that you're trying to reconstruct, I mean, if you want, you just use K as R. It doesn't really matter here, but in general, you might want to keep them separate. So let's say K. Just going back to just be consistent with our previous notation. Okay, so now how does the plot of K itself look like? Um, if I were to say plot the rank of a matrix, so rank of a matrix would behave like this. Let's say with respect to increasing dimensions of the matrix, or the coordinates of the matrix rather. So this is how the rank of the matrix would behave like. However, for example, minimizing the rank is a challenging issue. So rank is the issue with the rank of a matrix, rank X. I've actually shown it to be continuous, but it's not even continuous. Okay. So ideally I should just show it as some bunch of dots here. Oh, okay. So it's just a bunch of dots here. These are interpolation. So rank is not even continuous. What to speak of convexity? Rank X is not continuous. Or to speak of convexity. So what you can do instead is look at sigma. So I want to ask you, how would you use sigma? I told you that there are k entries, the rank entries, which are non-zero in sigma. But sigma, the entries in sigma themselves are continuous. So what can I do with sigma? Can I make use of sigma to kind of approximate the rank? Any suggestions? What if I look at the sum of the, say, the squares of the singular values? So let's say summation, I mean sigma 1 square, okay, this say this is sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma k, the rest are all zeros. Only k of them are non-zeros. So sigma 1 square plus sigma 2 square plus sigma k square. How do you think this is going to behave vis-a-vis the rank function itself? Any thoughts? In fact, this has a name. This is in fact called the spectral norm of the matrix X. Is called X star. Okay, it's a norm. How do you think this will behave? If all the sigmas were 1, what would happen? If you have a rank 1 matrix, what would happen?
You are muted.
Oh, sorry. If sigma 1 square is sigma 2 square equals sigma k square equals 1, what would happen? I mean, the unlikely event of this happening. The spectral norm would be what? Actually,
K.
yeah, this is
K, rank
spectral norm square.
matrix.
This will be exactly k, right? So this is the spectral norm square. This will exactly be k. So it looks like this can be used to approximate. The issue is, of course, the sigmas could take large values, but they are all at least positive. And now sigma squares will not be negative. So it turns out that the if you were to use this, let me use a shaded color here. It will turn out to be something like this. Okay, if you plot the so-called spectral norm, it'll be the tightest envelope which is convex. Okay, the spectral norm X star this is the tightest enclosing convex envelope around the rank function. Okay, now
Excuse me, sir.
it's called the envelope. Basic, yeah.
What are we plotting it against? What is in the x-axis?
Yeah, actually the x-axis, think of the x-axis as different values. Okay, so across matrices, we are now basically looking at different matrices X. Okay, so
Okay.
envelope is the um, tightest enclosing convex envelope for the rank. Yeah, you can actually do a n-dimensional, three-dimensional plot and observe yourself. Three-dimensional is certainly possible. Okay, so this gives you some kind of control in the continuous space, continuous formulation around the matrix X. Okay, so we wanted to go rank, and here's the matrix completion optimization problem. We are using the spectral norm.
Sir,
Oh,
I
sorry,
have a doubt.
I made a mistake. It's a nuclear norm. I've been using the word spectral norm, the nuclear norm. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Sir, rank of the matrix sir, will be maximum of the dimension, right? So if I have
Minimum, minimum of
three,
the dimensions. Minimum, not maximum.
sir, I mean, yes, sir, that only, sir. Sir, then, sir, this continuous function can exceed that, right? I mean, if I have a 30 by 4 matrix, then my rank can be a maximum 3. But this norm can be more than 3.
Yeah. So your question is why should it be shown below, right? You should probably shown it above. I should have shown it above.
Sir, not that I was
Mm.
I was worried about that. Sir, it should be in some range, right? I mean, there should be some constraint that that extra value should not increase. I mean, exceed the minimum of the dimension of the matrix.
Yeah. So this the notion of envelope we are not I've not defined it thoroughly here. I'm just trying to give you the intuition. It's a very good convex approximation. That's what we're intending to say. Now the if you try and minimize the nuclear norm, you would be trying and minimizing the rank. That's the basic intention, right? We are not trying to go beyond that into understanding the specific relation that speak. So the relation is more of monotonicity than of exact equality. What you're talking about is should the nuclear norm not be made to constrain to not exceed the min of m and n, right? That's what you're trying to say.
Yes, sir.
I'm saying that is not required here because it's anyways a surrogate. Is that clear? So
Yeah,
simple
okay.
matrices, I mean, and it's not that rank is the only notion of simple matrix. Rank is a one notion of simplification for a matrix, right? We are saying, well, the nuclear norm is another notion of simplification. It has a connection with the rank. Is that clear? Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the it tries to ensure that the matrix X is low ranked, but at the same time it is convex, is continuous, and so on. So this can be solved. Now, anyone can guess how you would solve this problem? Any suggestions? Again, intuitions will be great here because as we are delving into solving optimization problems, you'll find that some intuitions we develop in these few applications will be formalized later on. What would be an intuition? Yeah. Can it be inspired by the SVD? SPD of X. The issue is now X has to be solved, right? I mean, so you don't have the X to begin with. What would you do? So you can do an SVD and then do what? Any suggestions? Okay, so if there are no suggestions, the basic idea is something like an iterative principal component, and I mean is iterative singular value projection or thresholding. So what you would do is you would start with some x, let's say x naught. So any iterative method will start with an x naught. Okay, then you do its SVD. Let's say you sigma 0 v, you or whatever v sigma, let me consistent v sigma 0, but this is also v0 sigma 0 u0 transpose. Okay, now this u0 would have lots of um, basically singular values. Maybe maybe you start with a full rank x. Full column rank or full rank x0. And then you come up with this sigma 0. And then you try and the whole idea is simplification, right? Now this x0 could have been obtained by solving this. By this is overly sorry, underdetermined set of equations. So you'll have lots of solutions. Okay, but let's say you find an x that minimizes this very well. Say full rank is x0 without the simplicity constraint, such that x0 is an argmin. It minimizes. So when we say argmin, uh, there could be multiple argmins. I mean multiple x's that minimizes objective. So argmin basically is all those x's that minimize, and we're saying we'll pick one of them, but without any regard to the nuclear norm. Okay, you do this, and then the rest is um, based on SVD. You can threshold. Okay, so what would you do? You'd say, okay, I'll pick the, instead of picking all these sigmas, um, I'll pick only say the top k sigmas. So there you can do iterative thresholding. You can I'll not get to the details of this, but let's say sort similar to PCA, right? Sort sigma 0, I mean the sigma squares, right? So sigma 1 square greater than sigma 2 square greater than equal to, rather, sigma k square. In this case could be the min of MNN. You may ask for a full rank, right? Or full possible rank. And then you basically now pick a few at a time. Let's say you pick the top, in fact, top n minus 1, or everything except the smallest, and check whether the x is sufficiently close enough to x naught. Okay, so this gives you, each of these is giving you a different version of x. Let's call this x tilde, right? So pick keep including the sigma I squares, right, until let's say the x I tilde is sufficiently close to x naught, yet you don't have to involve all of them. Okay, so from x naught rather. Okay, so this entire algorithm is called yeah, it's called the iterative singular value thresholding algorithm. That's what we presented. There are other ways of solving this as well. You could also explicitly model this using some decomposition. X is L into R, where L and R are such that they are M cross K and K cross N. So that by design will make X to be rank K or less. And then you'll try and optimize for L and R. That's another way. And that brings us to the next topic. That's also the related to the next topic. Any questions? I would like this to be interactive, so please do ask questions. Okay, so let's look at application 5 if there are no questions. So application 5 is called low rank and non-negative matrix factorization. So here you are interested in factorization, but you want to make sure that your factorization is intuitive and not wasteful. Okay, let me try and motivate this. So let's say you're trying to similar kind of problem. Let's say this is X, right? So if X was, let's say, L into R or L hat R hat, such that L hat had negative entries. Okay, rank has to be low. X should be low rank, but if L hat had negative entries, what's really happening is, let's say L hat is feature weights, right? And R is say features. So then what you're saying is, okay, let's say minus 5 times R1 plus 3 times R2 minus 2 times R3 and so on. Unfortunately, we are just spending some energy on these features R1 and R3. Just wasting energies on these features R1 and R3. The question is, can we avoid them? Maybe it's possible to reduce the 3R2 to 2R2 by making the weights of R1 and R3 to be 0. Okay, so that's the whole intention here. Can we avoid such negative entries? Because especially because I see it might make sense in some places where you really have negative sentiments, negative features. But there are often settings where you want to choose and not discard, right? So often you're interested in positive, positive factor weights. Let me write that down here. So settings in which, let's say, you want to include keywords associated with ads, right? So you would like these set of L and R's such that there are no negative weights in L or even in R. Okay. So how do you do that? Okay, that can also be posed as an optimization problem. That becomes again a matrix factorization. You can, as I said, you can put this additional constraint on the L and R that they are positive, right? So this is the matrix factorization optimization problem. So low rank and non-negative. Low rank is by design because I'm actually using K here. So let me again highlight how low rank is there. So rank of the matrix LR, what will that be? It'll be greater than equal to, I'm sorry, it will be less than equal to K. It cannot exceed K. So that low rank is already by design. And you may additionally have the non-negativity. How do you put the non-negativity? Yes. What can you do for non-negativity? Anyone?
Sir, suppose if I take a matrix L dash where the value can be negative, but uh, the relation between n and L dash will be that the each element of L will be the squared of the element in the L dash, and we can use that to minimize this expression.
Okay, so sum of the squares of the elements in L dash.
No, sir. I was saying that that each element in L will be the corresponding element in the L dash, but the squared of that, or the yes, the
Oh,
squared of
I
that.
see. You're saying that solve it by having L itself as decomposing L itself into product of two matrices, right?
No, sir,
So,
sir. Sir, it will be the sir, I will be replacing L with the L dash, where each element will be squared. Am
no, no, I
I?
get it. I get it. So that's what when you say each element is square, then that's itself decomposed into product of two identical matrices. I mean, saying x is equal to y square is like saying x should be decomposed into y, which
Yes,
is
sir. Yes,
fine.
sir.
That's a very
Yes.
so then that's an interesting solution. So solution one, um, L itself is say L dash or L tilde transpose into say L tilde, right? Something like this. And R itself is say R tilde transpose into R tilde. Can we think of another solution? Something along the lines of what we did just now, right? We talked about this iterative singular value thresholding. And another very intuitive approach in optimization is often called projection. You project. You start with whatever values you get, but some of them you threshold, project them to zero, and again solve. Okay, so and in fact, I'll give you this very simple recipe. Mm, Okay, so let's next slide we'll elaborate on that. I mean, it's not there, but I'll write it down for you. Okay, so this is the idea. You want to solve this. L greater than equal to 0, R greater than equal to 0. So one way you can solve this, as was pointed out, do a reparameterization. The first suggestion is basically called a reparameterization approach. Right? And the second method which I'm talking about now is a projection approach. And what is the projection? I want things to be greater than equal to 0. Okay, so again, I'm just going to provide the intuitive expression like I've done so far. So let's say I start with some, right? I start basically with some values L naught, R naught. Okay, and L naught, R naught, as you pointed out, might not actually have this constraint, unconstrained L naught. Might violate say L naught greater than equal to 0, R naught greater than equal to 0. So what we try and do is through a projection try and bring them down. But you don't want to bring them down by arbitrary thresholding, right? So multiple ways you can do it. So the idea is iteratively project. Project to what space? To the space of L greater than equal to 0, R greater than equal to 0. Uh, so one such algorithm turns out to be as follows. Again, I will not get into details right now, but it would be something like this. You will say if the so you'll basically now look at what the ideal decomposition is, right? As against, so there's a matrix you're trying to reconstruct, right? L naught R naught, say unconstrained version, and now you're trying to see your projected version. How is it with respect to L naught R naught? So you can say Li, okay, is something like, okay, you'll have to do this for Li and Ri both. Let me just so this see, L and R basically will also have some orthogonality property. That's what we'll assume. So with that assumption, okay, so I don't think I'll have all the dimensions. Just help me make sure I match the dimensions properly. So L naught R naught would have been X, but let me try and get the, I'll try and get this L I minus 1 transpose R I minus 1 transpose, something like this. And at the numerator, okay, so I don't think I have the exact expression here, but this is a spirit. So the idea is, if your see, these are thresholded values from the previous iteration, say Li Ri. So if they are deviating significantly from the denominator, you're trying to push it up. So that's the idea. I'll probably write down the expression more carefully after the class, but this is the idea. You try and the expressions are such that you're trying to pull them to L naught R naught, yet at the same time maintain positivity. Okay, so something similar we'll have in Ri. Okay, I'm not going to write down the entire expression, but this yeah, this is the basic idea of iterative projection algorithm. And we'll see projection algorithms, a whole slew of them, but I think for the time being this is sufficient. Um, Sometimes you could also have that y which you are trying to interpolate in terms of A and LR. That could be fully absorbed, absorbed, right? So in that case, yeah, you could just have this y as a entire matrix y minus LR. Okay. Are there any questions? Otherwise, we'll continue to the next topic. Yeah, I don't want to get into algorithms too much. Just want to give you a flavor of the approach. Okay.
So it was element by so it was element wise division, right? Of the matrices.
Yeah. It was, yes. It'll be element wise. You're right. It's
Okay.
element wise. Very good point. Element wise division. Okay. So the next application is contextual bandits. So let's say I'm going to just switch to a demo. I think there's an interesting demo I found. So this is the demo of bandits, propensity weighting, and Simpson's paradox in R. I'll send you the link. So let's say you have a website which says sport and movie related articles. So now it turns out that men may prefer certain kinds of articles. Women may prefer certain kinds of articles. Okay, so let me go back to this definition. So let's say we show ads or articles. In this case, articles could be ads. The users could be women, and each article or ad. Okay, so I'm just going to say this ad slash article. Okay. Okay. So you're going to show these ads or articles to users with each article consisting of features. What would be those features? There could be the title, the text, right, the query, and so on. And then what you have is an online policy. So that policy is recommending or showing articles to men and women. The system then comes back and logs the feedback. Whether man or woman picked that article, read that article or not. Okay, so let me just go back to this. I just paste this link here. And now what you're going to pick from this particular link is another interesting aspect. So the user basically, when the person, a user or a man or woman picks an article, basically there's a reward that the user is associating with that article or ad. That's how the feedback is being logged. Okay, so let's look at the ith user use case. Ith user, as I said, could be based on more detailed demographic information. For the time being, it's just man or woman. Okay, so you have xi is the ith user, characterized using a bunch of features: xi1, xi2 to xi key. Okay, and then what is the, for the ith user, what's happening? Some action is being taken. The policy is taking some action, showing some article. Okay, so this it has shown an article AI based on ad slash article policy. And this is an online policy which is evolving. Okay, that's what we have. Okay, let me highlight this part. So the online policy with certain randomization picks ads. That's exactly what's happening here. Now the policy itself, we can give it a name. We'll call it, let's say, pi theta for an user xi based on the features of that person, man, woman, whatever. It has picked certain article. The user, on the other hand, has assigned a reward. So use the ad itself has been picked based on the featureization. Okay. However, the user will now give a reward, right? And user xi is assigning a reward ri. So let's look at this. Here, both male and female visitors actually prefer sports articles over movie articles. So there are some rewards. Male is assigning some reward to sport, some reward to movie, right? But in general, you find that the scale of the female is larger. The reward that females assign to movies are larger than the rewards that the males assign to sport. So that's an important. These are actual preferences. They are not normalized preferences. Okay, so let's actually look at. Let's capture this. So we are given this kind of banded log data in the form of x1, a1, r1, p1. So what is x1? The features we saw. A1 is the action that was taken by the online policy. R1 is the reward that was assigned by the user. P1, on the other hand. Okay, so what is missing in this entire um, discussion? What is P1? There's a bias here. There's a bias associated. This P1. So let's look at. Okay, so we have not written the exact form of P1, but say just pasting from here male for the sports arm as against the movie arm, and contrast that with the female rewards for the sports as against the movie. So 0.4, 0.3. As against here 0.8, 0.7. Okay. So there's a bias in the scores, and we need to do something to basically estimate a model such that the bias of the there's a bias, the preferences, they are removed. Okay. So how do we design an objective function to handle this is a question. Is it clear? So given this banded log data, and again referring to this particular example. Okay, so here's how you can define, right? You can do the following. Even though there is 0.4 and 0.3, you can look at more information here. So there's some information given here. Now, such as the site's editor just knows that men like sports and women like movies related articles. So the editor has some business logic implemented, assigning movie related articles on an average to 75% of female visitors. So what has the editor done? So movie articles are given to 75% of female visitors and sports article to 75% of male visitors. So that's the bias that has been brought in by the logic, the right. Just a second. These are the scores. I just want to bring out the other aspect. So these are scores. These are rewards. Sorry. But what I'm going to now bring out is the bias. So there's a bias in the system policy. And what's the bias in the system policy? This is exactly the policy. The editor has some business logic that assigns movie related articles on average to 75% of female visitors and sports articles to 75% of male visitors. Okay, so let's make a note of that. This font is too big. Okay. Now we want to kind of normalize for this or adjust for this. How do we do that? So if you just use this, right? So 75% ads are shown to males. So you look at 0.75 into 0.4. So if you look at sports itself, you'll have a very high weightage, 0.4 into 0.75 plus 0.8 into 0.25. Just because women um, tend to give higher scores, even though they seem to have preference for sports, movie seems to have overall higher weightage because 75% of the movies were shown to females and not to males. So overall, the CTR for the movie arm is higher. That's the problem. Okay. So putting these together, that there's a bias in the system policy, right? So you'll have overall the higher score for movies as against for sports. That's what we see here. So how do you now adjust for this bias as well is a question. Okay, so let's also develop on this. Let's assume that we can take some number of actions. For example, like in this case, right, in the example, we had k equals 2. And now there are feature vectors which are used by the policy, the backend policy, which we denoted by pi theta xi. That pi theta xi is using these features. To come up with an action. AI is the action chosen by the current online policy, which is the pi theta xi. Now, PI is the probability of the logged action. This is also called the propensity score. PI is called so because of its propensity. As I said, there's this propensity. I mean, again, I'll give the same example. So this exactly the statement, right, is a propensity. So we need to adjust for this propensity score. That's the next step. Now, how do you characterize this propensity? Well, you can say PI, the propensity for say movies being shown to females here is 0.75 is high. So can we characterize that in our expression? Yes, we will. We'll do that next. And finally, we need to account for the reward. And that was shown as this particular table. This is the reward matrix. Okay, so given all of this, what is our final goal? Well, we have this pi theta. We need to also have a form for pi theta, which uses the features x, x1 to xk. So we want the policy, of course, should be taking that action which maximizes f theta xj, where f theta is a link function. Simple example of f theta is the identity link function. F theta is say just theta transpose x. No transformation, it's just a linear simple function. Okay, so here's our first effort towards the contextual bandit problem. What you're doing is, so this is a division, Ri divided by Pi. Okay, it's Ri by Pi. So because propensity is to be discounted, what we have done is done an inverse propensity estimation. Okay, so 1 upon Pi. Ri is to be directly taken. So Ri into the cases where the suggested action coincides with what the person picked. AI is what the person picked, and pi theta xi is what the model suggested. So you want the model suggestion to agree with the suggested action. Okay, so this is the very obvious inverse propensity estimate reward, right, based on the reward, directly proportional to reward, inverse proportional to the propensity, and looking at the indicator function. However, this is a discrete optimization problem in the sense that you'll have a very large search space. So you can do a softmax relaxation instead of having this discontinuous function. You'll have a continuous function. What is this? A continuous is simply a softmax relaxation. So instead of looking at this indicator, I am looking at a softmax on the link function f theta. Okay, so the form of f theta itself could be a deep neural network. So yeah, that's it for this last application. In case you have some remaining question, please let me know.
Sir, sir, why do we have this large space very large here?
Why do we have a large search space?
Yes, sir. Where does that come from? because I mean we will have the finite number of AIs, right?
Yeah, finite number of AIs, but the theta is a very large search space, right? So it's theta is continuous. It's not a discrete
Okay.
optimization problem, but this is the search space of all possible pi theta xi's being equal to AIs is very large. It's combinatorial.
And sir, one more thing, that do we know that a P is always given? I mean, is there any case where we may not know P?
That's a good point. I mean, we may not be given P, in which case you could just take it to be uniform. But the kind of matrix we showed is, see, this is in the interest of the ad agency or the right, basically um, the book agency, the library or whatever. So um, it's better for them to acknowledge their own propensities, their own priors, right? So and the model will start with some priors. Right? The model will start with some kind of assignment which it wants to revise over time. Is this clear? So
Yes, sir.
the default is just all uniform, but if there's a propensity, it's good to account for that in the loss function, or in this case, the gain function, the reward function. This is an overall reward function. So it's a maximization problem, not minimization. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so can we move on to the next set of applications? We have some 10 minutes left. Um, the discrete optimization problems are often very related to graphical models, sometimes related to feature selection, and the third large class is data subset selection. So the first is the map inference and probabilistic model. If you're trying to find a sequence of parts of speech tags for a sequence of words in a sentence, let's say the sentence is um, today is Monday, the 10th of January 2022. Okay, so if you're looking at part of speech tags, um, so Monday is a day of the week, but it's also a proper noun. You can call it a PN. Uh, this is a date. The whole thing is a date. Well, Monday could also be considered a date. So let's in fact take the simpler case, right? DT. This whole thing is DT, but you could also say, well, this is DT, this is DT, and so on. Now we can get more specific. You can say this is a day of the week, weekday. This is a number, numeric value. This is a month. This is a year, right? Depends on the granularity you want. Now, if I'm trying to make inference on a sequence, let's say for the time being we consider the one at the bottom, which is more fine grained. I would be interested in the structure determining the sequence of the part of speech tags. So the fact that week has come up would probably mean that a number is following soon, or a month is following soon, or a year is following soon, and likewise. Now there are maybe 5 or 6 different formats. Instead of saying today is 10th of January 2022 and a Monday, that could be another form. You could have a third form, which is today is Monday, January 10th, 2022. That could be a third form or fourth form. But overall, there may be a finite number of such configurations. And what we are trying to determine here is, given the sequence, determine the most probable tag sequence. Okay, you may even be interested in extracting the date from this um, sentence. So the overall problem is basically assignment of labels. So here you have a large possible set of candidates. So you want to basically select from this set the most appropriate one. Um, the key here is to associate energy. Okay, so you'll have, let's say, energy associated with this configuration, and let's say this is exactly the configuration that turns out to be. Okay, let's say the year corresponded to this entry, the last entry, month corresponded to the second entry, num corresponded to the third entry, and in wk corresponded to the first entry. Wk here, week. Okay, so you want the energy connecting these dots together to be maximized as against some other energy configuration. So for effective date extraction or annotation, we would like the configuration, say highlighted in yellow, to have higher energy than any other configuration. Okay, there could be other configurations. Let's say I'll put a gray configuration here. So maybe this is another configuration, and maybe a very dull configuration saying that that Monday is a verb, 10th is a verb. Let's say this is a very dull configuration, and deliberately I'm just giving a very stupid one. So let's say this is saying that this is a verb, right? Whereas the first one said is a week. Likewise, in the second case, again, no, this is a num. Whereas my dull configuration said this was again a verb. In the third one, it was a month. My dull configuration said it's a verb. And here, the fourth case, it said it's a week, but it's a stupid idea because my dull configuration, it said it's a week, whereas the smart configuration that I should pick said say here. Okay, so I want this to be picked up, the smart configuration to be picked up. Okay, so this is any other configuration in gray. There could be other configurations as well. So this is the map inference problem. Example of the map inference problem. Now, how does it turn out to be a discrete optimization problem? Well, that's obvious, right? Because I have from this grid, I want to select that configuration which maximizes the energy. The energy is associated with these pink arrows. There are also features associated with those pink arrows. Currently, I'm not interested in determining the thetas which maximize the energy. That's another problem, right? You could have two problems. So formally, what I would define, how I would define the map problem is that I want a configuration of these. Let's call these y's, y1, y. Let me not confuse it with labels. So let's just call it L1, L2, L3, L4, L5, right? So I want a configuration of these L, which is the one that maximizes over all possible L tilde. Now each configuration L tilde leads to some energy. Okay, so this is an energy xi associated. So this the xi associated with the parameters theta. This is a potential function xi associated with these parameters theta, which is a function of the label sequences L1 tilde, L2 tilde, and so on. So this is a discrete optimization problem. Now it turns out that such discrete optimization problem under certain structure can be solved efficiently. Otherwise, it's a very large search space. So for those of you who have done a basic ML problem, you've probably seen hidden Markov models, right? But there are hidden Markov models are basically chain models. Now there could be tree models. If you do an advanced course on machine learning, you probably talk about you come across tree structured models where you can use some product algorithms efficiently to solve this exactly this problem. Okay, dynamic programming. So for the key here is again algorithms comes to rescue here for chain and tree structures. This is a chain. For example, what we have dealt with today, the tag sequence L1, L2, L3, L4 is a chain. So this is an example of chain. But in general, also tree structures, the optimization problem can be solved efficiently using dynamic programming. However, even if they are not train or they're not chain structure or tree structure, if they have some other interesting properties, I mean, you can create something called factor graphs. I have posted my very detailed notes on graphical models where I give some examples, but you can come up with alternative representations under certain assumptions. Okay, there are certain assumptions you need. For example, one important assumption is submodularity. Under submodularity, also you could solve them efficiently if you're looking at minimum maximizing. Actually, I should say lower energy. Um, I mean lower energy, higher potential. Okay, let me just qualify. When I spent energy, actually I meant potential, or likelihood is the best word. You typically be interested in maximizing likelihood. Okay. So you're typically interested in basically higher likelihood or lower energy. This Xi, for example, could be likelihood. So this turns out to have some nice properties when you have some properties as submodularity. So I'll discuss a bit more on this in the next class, and then we'll take other concrete examples. We'll stop for today unless there are some questions.
Sir, I have a question related to course logistic.
Yeah.
Can I ask?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, first of all, the contact detail, I wasn't able to find out contact detail of TA. So, Durga, I wasn't able to figure.
I'll put her
Find
ID
that.
on the website. I'll do that.
Yeah, and I was wondering about the team size for the project, sir.
So team sizes could be, as I said, ideally two. I'm okay with three, but my typical observation is that one of the members just becomes dormant. But up to team size of three is fine, not larger. I would advise two, but three is okay, acceptable.
And those assignments, course assignments, which
Mm.
you said there will be two. So those assignments are also expected to be done in
No,
groups,
no,
or those
they are
are
individual. Assignments are individual.
okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
That's it.
thank you. Okay. Any other question on the class so far? Otherwise, we'll stop for today. Thanks, then.